Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for your work. So I guess today I kind of wanted to give like a presentation on, a lot of the data we're seeing on marijuana and some of the trends we're seeing on marijuana, but then some of the really kind of at the back end, the newer federal trends we're seeing, the president's budget, what Congress is looking to do, what kind of the priorities are in DC, and how that's affecting, prevention, treatment, recovery, really everything in the drug policy and addiction policy space, as well as kind of what the trends are looking at on the state level, what my projection would be for kind of the up and coming fights, and some of the things we're seeing currently today around the country. So I'm sure many of you are already serious experts on drug policy here, but something that I always like to discuss and just kind of at the outset of these conversations is kind of making definitions. A lot of people conflate the idea of marijuana decriminalization or, penalization. That's one question. Should you have criminal sanctions on marijuana users or marijuana sales or not? The second thing, really being the medicinal aspect. Should you vote to legalize medical marijuana? Medicine by ballot with dispensaries, that have kind of just give as much marijuana as you want? Should it be an FDA regulatory system? What should that look like? And then really the third thing, which is the full-on recreational use and sales and distribution of marijuana. And what Sam's platform is to support kind of reducing criminal penalties for the low level kind of possession of marijuana and expunging records for people who have that on their criminal record, but opposing kind of the legalization of marijuana more broadly. And so for some more background for those of you who might not know, Sam, we're really the leading kind of group in the nation opposing marijuana legalization, kind of enacting or advocating for a third way position, as I kind of just outlined. We were founded by, as was talked about earlier, Kevin Sabet, who worked in the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations in ONDCP, and by former Congressman Patrick Kennedy. And I myself have been at SAM for almost 6 years now, since I was 18. And someone who's in long-term addiction recovery, about 6.5 years sober, who really struggled with thank you. I really struggled with the high potency THC products that were seeing being sold and advertised, as I'll show, and marketed to young people, especially nationwide, in a really, really harmful way. On to the next, see if I can. Sorry, just trying to press forward here. All right, yeah. Okay, now it will work. It skipped way too ahead. Okay, great. So, one of the biggest concerns that we have with marijuana is actually what our kind of slogan is preventing a new big tobacco, that the marijuana industry is going to turn into big tobacco. And when we say that quite literally. It's not just a metaphorical, figurative statement. When Canada legalized marijuana in 2018, Altria, the biggest tobacco company in the world, which is the owner of Marlboro and Philip Morris, invested 1.8 billion with a B dollars to become the majority shareholder of the only two licensed marijuana cultivators and sellers in the country of Canada. This doesn't just go for tobacco. This goes for alcohol. Constellation Brands, which is a big alcohol company. It's a conglomerate that owns Molson Coors, Corona Beer, Svedka Vodka. They invested over $4 billion into the legal marijuana industry in Canada. Big Pharma, the former CEO of Purdue Pharma, actually became one of the first 36 medical marijuana business license holders in the country of Canada. These guys have kind of joined up and are coming to the United States now. There's actually a group called CPAIR, the Coalition for Cannabis Policy, Education, and Regulation. It's a group that was founded by Altria and by Constellation Brands, Reynolds American, a bunch of other alcohol and tobacco companies. And their top lobbyists are Tom Daschle, former United States Senator and Senate Majority Leader, and former chairman of the most powerful committee in the House of Representatives, Energy and Commerce Committee, Greg Walden from Oregon. So they've really hired some heavy hitters from the big alcohol and big tobacco arm of the marijuana industry to fight to lobby for marijuana legalization. And why would they do so? I think it's probably obvious to many of us here, but it's the addiction for profit model, right? There's this kind of rough rule, the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, that says 80% of profits come from 20% of consumers, the most kind of addicted or hooked consumers. Now, this data right here is actually from the Colorado Department of Revenue for the market size for marijuana. It's kind of color coordinated there. So you can see it's not exactly 80-20, but it's roughly the same, where 67% of the amount of marijuana consumed in Colorado is being consumed just by 22% of users. That's who this industry is making its money from. And we've seen the same thing in the alcohol industry, right? Where the top 10% of alcohol sales, or top 7%, sorry, of the drinking population are making up 75% of alcohol sales in the United States. It's really rinse and repeat, copy paste for these industries to be able to do this. The difference being that there's a really, unfortunately, positive public perception and low risk perception for marijuana. And so I think what these tobacco companies and these alcohol companies and these pharmaceutical companies are doing are looking at the current state of play in the United States and saying, oh my God, we're going to be able to get them again. We're going to be able to hoodwink the public again, that this is a safe and healthy and non-addictive substance, even though, today's marijuana is like 99% THC, a far cry from the Woodstock 2% weed of the 1970s. What are kind of the impacts, the most negative impacts in states that legalize marijuana? One of the things is targeting to youth. I'm going to show you one billboard and then one post on social media. These are real billboards and real social media posts that kind of show the tactics that this industry is using. So I laugh every time I see this because it's so ludicrous. Ease, this is basically a marijuana company, and it is it's the Uber for marijuana. So you can get marijuana delivered to your door from a dispensary with this app Ease, and it says delivering more joy than dogs and babies combined. And I always like, I want that. Like, who doesn't want more joy than dogs and babies combined? It's very obvious. But to young people, right, they see that and that's their first thought, but they don't have the critical thinking, judgment, fully developed brain type skills to understand that doesn't mean that this is a healthy choice. And I think they're really preying on that when they have these kind of direct messaging saying this will make you happy, which is what we all want. An even more egregious example, in my opinion, if you look at this, this is a social media post from Mighty Med Vape. So this is quote unquote medical marijuana, where THC vape companies are advertising with cartoon characters targeted actually at Comic-Con. Where a lot of young people go who might be interested in comics or superheroes or things that healthy young kids should be interested in, and they're saying on the right side there that their local sesh award they got for being the most potent cartridge. Right, it's a stamp of kind of approval of the product. It's a point of pride that they are selling the most highly addictive products on the market. So what is the real kind of raw data telling us today? One of the kind of most interesting but kind of frightening statistics, in my opinion, is almost an updated one. 10 to 20 years ago, if you looked up the addiction rate of marijuana, the official sources would tell you something like 1 in 9, 1 in 10, 1 in 11 people who are past year marijuana users are developing a cannabis use disorder, which is a clinical definition in the DSM-5. But what is it saying now? If you go to NIDA's website, if you go to CDC's website, what it will tell you is that 1 in 3 people who are past year users of marijuana are developing a cannabis use disorder or an addiction to marijuana. This is even worse in adolescents. especially in states that legalize marijuana. This is one of the most fascinating studies that was done. It looked at, okay, the rate of the acceleration, because everywhere kids are getting more addicted to marijuana. The rate of marijuana addiction among kids everywhere really is going up. And so what they did was they analyzed states that had legalized marijuana, kind of in states before and after, compared to states that haven't legalized marijuana. Bottom line, among kids aged 12 to 17, that age bracket experiences a 25% increase in the acceleration of development of cannabis use disorder, 25% higher after recreational marijuana legalization. So we're seeing a really negative direct impact in addiction among youth after legalization. And this is really borne out in data as well. What we're seeing among youth is that 25% of kids who have used marijuana in the past year report using it every day or nearly every day. We're even seeing that there are more daily marijuana users today than there are daily drinkers. I hate the comparison game between drinking and alcohol and marijuana. I think drinking can be worse in some ways, marijuana can be worse in other ways. They're both harmful substances for you. But the reality is there are more daily marijuana users than even daily drinkers. Even though there are more past year drinkers than past year marijuana users, it's pretty ridiculous how the acceleration of addiction and daily use of this substance has gotten, especially among our kids. We're even seeing kids are responding to polls, like this one from monitoring the future, which said that 1 in 4 12th graders reported that they would, increase or increase their use of marijuana if it were legalized. Another kind of factor with marijuana legalization, the increase in use, what's that really resulting in? What are the consequences other than addiction? What we're seeing is if you are a user of high potency marijuana, you're 2 times as likely to develop anxiety disorders. If you're a user, you're 4 times as likely to abuse marijuana. One of the most landmark kind of important studies in this field, in my opinion, is the 2019 Lancet study, where it found that if you're a user of high potency marijuana, you are 5 times more likely to develop psychosis compared to 3 times more likely even for regular users of lower potency marijuana. And I think really kind of this marijuana induced psychosis is a pretty scary thing that we're seeing occur, which is leading to increased rates of suicidality, increased rates of anxiety and depression, of course, and all sorts of other kind of comorbidities regarding your mental health. And it almost sounds like I try and frame this in a way for different folks to not make it sound like the old school, like what they would say, reefer madness, right? Which people kind of shy away from. But the reality is there are a lot of people who smoke marijuana for the first time and are getting psychosis. And the way I've kind of had this described to me is in schizophrenia as well. New research has actually come out from Denmark showing that about 30% of schizophrenia cases among men aged 21 to 30 would have been avoided entirely had they abstained from marijuana. And so kind of what is the kind of relationship between marijuana and psychosis and schizophrenia? One doctor described it to me like this, that oftentimes it's with people who have a genetic predisposition to developing schizophrenia or psychosis. And so if you kind of have a metaphor of like their brain, like the schizophrenia, like the door is open, it's just cracked open, it's just kind of ajar because of their genetics. But the marijuana use just pushes it wide open and kind of promotes the development of schizophrenia and psychosis. We're seeing marijuana use is associated with lower IQ among adolescents. This was a super long-term study that was done, actually beginning in the 19 with people born in the 1970s. Over 1,000 subjects. They were tested throughout their life. IQ was tested at 13 and 38, and marijuana use was tested at 18, 21, 26, 32, and 38. And what did we find? We found that those who were marijuana dependent before age 18 had a significantly kind of lower reduction in IQ than folks who were not dependent on marijuana before age 18. This study found about an average of 8 points in IQ drop occurs, which is like going from in like an A to a C student basically in school. We're seeing youth marijuana use is linked to suicide attempts or self-harm, which is incredibly tragic and sad. And this study conclusion was that cannabis use disorder is a common comorbidity and risk marker for self-harm, all course cause mortality, death by unintentional overdose, and homicide among youth with mood disorders. So we're seeing that marijuana, especially when it's kind of interacting with other mental health issues, can have an exacerbating effect. And I think this is the last slide on this section. Yeah, but this is kind of a good quote I like to leave folks with in terms of the harms of marijuana. This was the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General for Presidents Obama and Biden, and said, when it comes to youth, I worry that there is a perception that marijuana is completely harmless in our children. Our data tells us otherwise. When kids also have underlying mental health conditions, the impact of marijuana use can also be more significant. It's really powerful words from our country's top doctor. And under the first Trump administration, actually, Jerome Adams put out the first Surgeon General's kind of warning about marijuana, which was really powerful. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to discuss in terms of the health harms, some of the data points that we're seeing with marijuana coming out in the studies. And now I kind of want to transition the conversation into what we're seeing with federal budget, government cuts. I know that's a top of a lot of people, maybe everyone in this presentation's mind. And so I wanted to share some of the things that are on my radar in terms of like the good and the bad with what is happening with the budget and what we're seeing from cuts. So first of all, wanted to address kind of the Office of National Drug Control Policy here, which is an office within the White House. I would say the good is that the drug policy priorities highlighted by the Trump administration earlier this year, not the National Drug Control Strategy that is yet to really come out in full, but basic priorities really did emphasize a focus on prevention and treatment and long-term recovery, which are really the types of things that we're super invested in. And hopefully we can see more of a balance between kind of the supply and demand side when it comes to focusing on drug policy, because I think in the past there's been a lot of imbalance in either direction, depending on which party is in power. The president also emphasized later last year on kind of a high dollar, several like hundreds of millions of dollars he wanted to put towards a public service announcement campaign for drug prevention, which we have not funded in over 10 years, really at a serious level federally. We used to fund $200 million a year, $195 million a year, 25 years ago for PSAs and do kind of evidence-based PSAs. And that got all phased out by Congress. So I hope that ONDCP and other can coordinate that with other agencies. Now, kind of what are, in my opinion, the bad coming out of ONDCP specifically? They've proposed in the president's budget to move the drug-free communities, or DFC, out of ONDCP into HHS. And they've also proposed moving HIDA out of ONDCP into DOJ, as well as of DFC grants. I know CADCO was struggling with some grants at the State Department and things like that. And from our perspective, I know those things have always been a really big fight with ONDCP, especially in their relationship with OMB. But we want to see these programs remain within the Office of National Drug Control Policy. I think one of the reasons that ONDCP was developed and put in the White House was to cut a lot of that like government bureaucratic red tape. And I hope that's kind of the messaging that I would hope to use with the administration. Almost like cut the red tape when it comes to drug policy, right? These are programs we've had for a long time. They're programs that are flourishing. They're programs that we know are getting results. Don't have them get super bogged down and maybe diminished by moving them to another department rather than keeping them within ONDCP and fully funding them. The other thing, which is, not really a unique surprise, unfortunately, which is that the drug czar is not a cabinet level position. It used to be. We always advocated for that. And yet again, they seem to have passed on the decision to do that. And the other office I kind of wanted to hyper focus on was the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. So what's the good with SAMHSA? Kind of similar. I had a meeting with the SAMHSA administrator and some higher up folks at HHS to discuss different priorities. And I do believe that at least they think that they want a renewed focus on drug prevention. And we've really seen a lot of kind of liberalization policies that are not in the best way, a more what I would call like radical form of harm reduction policies being pushed, in the past by SAMHSA and HHS that I've seen up front and close. Not talking about naloxone, not talking about things like that or fentanyl test strips, but things that I think most people would agree are really positive things and life-saving interventions. But more kind of radical things happening. And I think there's going to be a shift away from that, which I believe is good. Yet, the bad, the president has proposed over $1 billion in proposed cuts to SAMHSA, which I don't think is a positive thing. They also want to kind of adopt or shift SAMHSA into this new AHA like administration within HHS that they're making. And I don't know if that will serve to kind of sideline certain entities like SAMHSA within the government. I think that's yet to be seen, but don't have the highest hopes in the world. And another specific thing that I was especially deeply concerned about, which I brought up in person, was the firing of all the staff who conducted the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the NISDA survey. I'm sure to everyone in this room, I'm sure you're all familiar that there are one or two people who are not. The National Survey on Drug Use and Health is the only federal survey that we have on drug use, on mental health issues, that is really nationally and demographically representative. So it's covering a lot of different bases. Although NISDA by name is not statutorily required, the a study to measure a bunch of different things like substance abuse and mental health and a bunch of factors is actually required by law for HHS to carry out. So if they don't do this study, if they don't do the survey, that would be defying statute. So in response to this recently, HHS put out a statement in which they said that they moved the survey collection to a private contractor. I think there's going to be a lot of institutional knowledge because they fired every single person who was running that study pretty much all at once, I think. And I think it's a year-round effort to do that. So I'm fearful about the kind of trustworthiness of the data. We even actually saw that recently. The RAND Corporation came out with I was surprised it didn't get more news because it's pretty startling. Basically, the RAND believes that NISDA's fentanyl use rates are off by a factor of 20. 20 times lower than what RAND's studies are showing. And RAND is basically as reliable as you can get in terms of studies. So you have the most reliable nonpartisan kind of policy analysis and data shop in the country saying that the only survey we have on these issues is off by a factor of 20. I expect that will get even worse. So that's just a prediction, but not the best. And then also with Medicaid, right? Medicaid cuts, I think, are going to disproportionately affect low-income Americans who are struggling with addiction and substance use and its consequences. We know that low-income Americans are struggling, who are struggling to find employment, especially, are affected disproportionately by substance abuse than other demographics. If you look at, the ones I know off the top of my head are like marijuana. I think it's about 30 to 35% of like regular marijuana users are in the population who are making less than $25,000 a year. So people who I think would qualify for Medicaid in every single state. And so, you're seeing if those lower income populations are disproportionately heavily using drugs like marijuana, they're going to have some negative health consequences, as we talked about. And so cutting health insurance, I think, will obviously have a negative impact on addiction and substance use. In terms of kind of state updates, and then I'd be happy to take any questions. I really wanted to kind of discuss what we're seeing with marijuana, as well as I think the like kind of the new horizon. So for recreational legalization, it's been quiet in terms of, I think it's things seem to like crescendo and then kind of go down in Hawaii, right? Hills and valleys there with the legalization fight. But in my personal opinion, there are really only six, 3 to 6 states that have not legalized recreational marijuana that realistically could. That would be Hawaii, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And then, sort of with a caveat, New Hampshire, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Hawaii is the only Democratic, pretty much fully blue state that has not legalized recreational marijuana. Pennsylvania, they're trying to do it right now. There's a huge fight right there. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with the Pennsylvania state legislature, but if you're not, the House is divided by 1 vote in terms of the party shift, and it's decently close in the Senate. And then in Florida, they had a ballot measure. They're making it even harder for measures to get on the ballot now. But in the 2024 election, they got, I don't know, it was like 50, it was between 55 and 57, I think. Or it may have been 56% of the vote to legalize recreational marijuana. But in Florida, you have to hit 60%. So even if that failed, they were creeping pretty far up there, and they're trying again for the next election. New Hampshire has not legalized marijuana. The people there who want to legalize have said that it will take over a decade until they do, because of the governor's stance and how the legislature looks. And so for us, that's a good thing. And then the Dakotas, they've tried. I think combined, they've had 4 to 5 ballot measures in the past 5 years. And one was successful, but it was overturned by the Supreme Court. And every other one has been unsuccessful just on its merits, or on the vote. So that's kind of the outlook that the states we're focusing on, and Iman on this call is helping lead state policy, so we'll be involved in all of those fights. What I am really looking at, and for those of you who don't know, Smart Approach to Marijuana, SAM, has a sister organization called the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions, or FDPS. And that was really created 2 or 3 years ago in response to the Oregon's Measure 110, which legalized the possession of all drugs. That was overturned last year. There was no real organized group fighting that and fighting, drug liberalization everywhere, among all substances. So we've gotten from kind of that angle. It's the same exact team that runs SAM. We've been really troubled by the psychedelics renaissance. I will not put it any like less strongly than 2012 was kind of the year for marijuana, because Colorado and Washington became the first 2 states to legalize recreational marijuana. 2025 is the year for psychedelics. It is the year, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It is becoming a Republican Party issue. They are the ones leading the psychedelics fight. It is becoming a Make America Healthy Again issue because it's quote unquote natural. And the amount of articles from major media outlets, the amount of bills that are being introduced in state legislatures is just, it's incredible. We've seen the expansion of legalization, already legal for sale in Colorado, Oregon, and New Mexico for medical psychedelics, like they did medical marijuana. But Democratic governors are actually very skeptical. So Katie Hobbs in Arizona vetoed a psychedelics bill. Janet Mills in Maine very likely opposes psychedelics, a decriminalization bill she sent to members of her administration to testify against. And Ned Lamont in Connecticut, my home state, has gone on the record opposing decriminalizing psychedelics. We did just see it's getting close though, and it really every kind of ounce of attention matters to this. In Maine, within a 24-hour period, both chambers of the state legislature passed psychedelics legalization by 1 vote. Now we were informed of this, and we did try to do our thing. And on the second reading, the final vote, a few votes flipped, and so it was defeated. But it was incredibly last minute, and I think it would have passed if a few things didn't happen, within a day's time. So that is really the next frontier, and what I'm spending my time on in addition to the marijuana issue. So I hope that this was helpful to you all and informative. My email is jordan@learnaboutsam.org.